So first and foremost, welcome. We are excited to have a little Q&A with our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Agustina Boehringer. Dr. Agustina has joined us recently as our Chief Medical Officer. However, she's worked with us since 2017. She's deployed with our disaster response team for a number of years. She is a doctorally educated PA. So she has her PhD in disaster medicine and also has her Master's of Science in PA Studies from Northeastern University. We have had Dr. Agustina deploy with us on a number of occasions, most recently to Honduras in the midst of the pandemic. And because of that, we feel she's uniquely educated, not just in pandemic. We like to joke that pandemics are her jam, given her PhD, but also given the operational environment deploying in disasters. She's also been heading up the clinical lead role in our vaccine efforts and has vaccinated in the thousands of individuals, I would venture to guess. So we're very grateful to have Agustina on board. I'm gonna close this slide so you can see her. Agustina, how are you?
I'm doing great, Joan. Thank you so much for that great introduction, and thanks everyone for joining us this evening. We hope we can, answer some questions about COVID-19 vaccines, and I know some people are concerned about several aspects of it, so I hope I can answer any questions that come up.
Absolutely. So Agustina, just to start things off, we want to lay some groundwork. We're here to talk about the COVID-19 vaccine in general, but we understand that there's likely some questions and concerns. Given the sensitive nature of it, I just want to highlight that there's a chat function in Zoom, so you can send me, Joan Kelly, a private message, or Agustina as well, by just clicking the chat button and then selecting Joan Kelly or Agustina directly to ask questions if you have any concerns or you just don't want to have to turn on your video and ask any questions. So Agustina, I'm going to start off by asking you a question just right off the bat. We have heard a lot about the vaccine being produced in record time, and some people have categorized it as rushed. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so you're right. The vaccine was produced much faster than we are used to in the US because we do have very tight regulatory rules to ensure medications and vaccines are safe. Having said that, I would not use the word rushed at all, and I'll explain in a moment. So one of the biggest obstacles to developing a medication or a vaccine, and the two are not exactly the same process, but for the purposes of this, is enrolling enough participants in the studies to have decent sample sizes. You don't want to do a tiny study, that's not safe enough. Normally, if it's a disease or a condition that either not a lot of people have or not a lot of people are worried about in the case of vaccines, it takes sometimes years and years and years to reach the numbers that are required in order to conduct a study. So let's say, for example, that we're trying to test a vaccine for typhoid fever, which is not something that we deal with in the US at all. Imagine how long it would take to recruit 40,000 participants. It could take 5 to 10 years, right? So that was not the case with COVID because so many people are worried about it. It's a pandemic. We all want to get to the end of this pandemic. So they were able, all companies that conducted studies were able to recruit tens of thousands of participants in a very, very fast time. The other thing that often stops or slows down the approval process is budget, right? Everything has to be paid for in a process, and it costs millions, sometimes billions of dollars to develop a drug to the point where it's FDA approved. Well, in this case, with Operation Warp Speed, being able to provide funding to the pharmaceutical companies, that was not an obstacle either. So those are two huge reasons why typically approvals take really long. And in the case of the COVID-19 vaccines, it didn't. Having said that, all the other aspects that the FDA ensures in order to approve, and in this case, it's authorized, not fully approved because it's authorized under emergency use. None of those steps were skipped or rushed through. No corners were cut. I've read extensively about the process, and there is nothing that is flagging as a concern to me. In fact, myself and my qualifying family members have all been vaccinated because I have no concerns about that process.
And so, Augustina, can you quickly touch on the difference between the emergency authorization and approved?
So the full approval will come once we vaccinate people, and we have to observe the actions in larger numbers of people. But the emergency use authorization is, again, it's in no ways less than or less rigorous than. It's just, for example, what the FDA sometimes does for drugs to treat certain rare diseases or certain types of cancer, and they're authorized under an emergency use. But again, the process is still just as rigorous, and it's a step, I would call it a step prior to the final approval.
Augustine, I appreciate you pointing out the differences between kind of medications being approved, and that's something that's always resonated with me. The more difficulty to get something approved as a vaccine because we're all well versus individuals that are ill and trying out experimental things. It's different, yeah?
It's very different, and exactly that's exactly why, right? Because we are even more rigorous with people who are well and healthy, right? We don't want to cause harm ever. That's why even before any products are tested on humans, even on the small scale, they are extensively tested in the lab and in animals as well. And of course, if any concerns arise, that is stopped. But you're absolutely correct. Vaccines are even more rigorous because they are given to healthy individuals.
So I see a question. The most recent folks that have been vaccinated, they were vaccinated within the last 6 months. So what do we know about the long-term effects? Can you speak to that?
Sure. So, you're right. The truth is we don't know the long-term effects. Having said that, while we have not had mRNA vaccines, which is what the Moderna or Pfizer vaccines are, we have had mRNA technology in use for, I would say, about a decade, mostly in cancer treatment. And then as far as the other vaccine that's approved right now, which is the Johnson & Johnson, or also known as Janssen vaccine, that uses a different viral vector, a virus that is not harmful to humans. And that technology has been used in vaccines. So neither technology has proven to be harmful when used in things that aren't specifically for COVID. There's no reason to believe that long-term side effects from the vaccine would occur. Again, of course, I can't say with absolute certainty. We need more time, but we do know, on the other hand, that COVID-19 can cause pretty severe long-term side effects. Vaccines, generally speaking, don't tend to cause harm or significant lasting side effects. Some medications can, and so the process for approval for those is a little bit different again, but vaccines, generally speaking, at worst may not be effective, which these vaccines have proven that they're extremely effective, but we are not concerned about long-term harm that is significant.
I've heard that folks are concerned about fertility and effects on that. And I think you can speak to the fact that there were individuals that were in the trial that got pregnant after receiving the vaccine.
Yes, absolutely. So there was initially some, honestly, I would characterize them as rumors because there was never really any scientific evidence behind them that were talking about whether the vaccine could affect the placenta when a woman is pregnant. And of course, the placenta is what feeds the developing baby, and damage to that would be terrible. But again, never has that arisen from actual scientific proof. It's not been tested specifically on pregnant women, but in the public, lots of pregnant women have gotten the vaccine, and then it's been extensively tested on pregnant animals with no evidence of damage. So currently there's no contraindication to the vaccine if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, but of course your decision should be informed by talking to your own doctor. But currently there's no contraindication that exists, no significant basis for that concern.
And I see that, and this is what we're hearing a lot in our vaccine sites, right? Many folks are worried about possible side effects from getting the vaccine. Can you tell us what people can expect?
Sure. Yes, you're right. A lot of people do tell me, hey, I heard you can feel pretty crummy after getting the vaccine, and I can't really afford to miss work, or which is an absolutely valid concern, right? Having said that, first I'll start by saying that only less than 40% of people report having systemic side effects from the vaccine. So that's less than half. And of those who do, the vast majority report symptoms that may be uncomfortable, but are by no means disabling. On the other hand, COVID, you never know, right? You could get a case of COVID that is completely asymptomatic. You could get mild cold-like symptoms. You could feel pretty sick for a couple of weeks, like you have the flu and you can't really get anything done. Or on the other extreme, of course, you can end up in the hospital for a long, long time. And some people, of course, a lot of people have died from it. So when taking your chances between, rolling the dice between maybe I'll feel kind of crummy for a day or two versus for a day or two where I can plan for that specific date, versus I might get COVID and could possibly end up very sick in the hospital for many weeks without being able to plan for it. I think the choice is pretty clear. And just to share, I have had COVID and I have had the COVID vaccine. And while my COVID was still considered mild because it didn't land me in the hospital, I felt absolutely terrible for a good 10 days or so. And that was about 3 months ago, and I still can't smell or taste. So, that's not so fun. With the vaccine, I felt a little achy and tired for a day, and I was still able to go to work and do my normal life. So again, risk-benefit scenario there.
I think that's a really good point. One of the individuals that we vaccinated just a week ago today, mentioned that he was so excited to be vaccinated because his 13-year-old niece died from COVID. And so often we think of this as a disease that might not affect people that are out working and going out all the time, but really it can affect everyone.
Absolutely. And it's a bit of yes, we know what are some risk factors that may make you sicker if you do get COVID, but that's just a risk factor. It doesn't mean that if you don't have that, there's no way you could get really sick. And we have seen young and otherwise healthy people be intubated in the hospital or have what we call the long hauler COVID, where they are still not back to normal. And then we've seen young, healthy people die of COVID. So you just don't know how it's going to affect you until you get it. And I don't think that's a chance anybody should take.
Plus, we want to protect everyone around us, right?
Exactly. Since the vaccine is, 2 of the 3 vaccines are approved for 18 and older, and 1 is approved for 16 and older. It is especially important to protect the children under 16 or even 18 because they, at this moment, cannot get the vaccine. So the best way for them to be protected is for the adults around them to be protected. And with children, while many times they have mild or asymptomatic infections, there is a very serious, rare but very serious side effect that is a multi-system inflammatory condition that could be life-threatening.
I didn't invite any other questions. I've got one more question for you, and then we'll pause to see if anyone else has questions, and I'll see if there is anything in the chat. But the last question I have for you is that, the U.S. and globally has a long history of really probably racist medical care. particularly around vaccine and treatment development, and all sorts of medical practices. What would you say to individuals that were hesitant to receive the vaccine because they're a minority, or because they understand that history and they don't want to be tested on?
That is an excellent and extremely valid point of hesitancy. Um, I will never, ever pretend to deny the atrocities that have been committed with minorities. And to this day, there is undeniable systemic bias in the healthcare system. When people talk about being experimented on, which of course is gravely concerning, most of the time, especially when we're talking about the Black community, people are still, of course, referring to the syphilis trials that occurred in the 20th century for 50 years or so, where the Black participants in the trial who had contracted syphilis, even once the treatment was discovered, were denied that treatment, only to experiment, to be subjects to see what untreated syphilis would do, which of course is unspeakably unethical and horrific. And that is always a question that gave me pause, because it's a fact that this happened, right? We can't deny that. But I recently heard the Reverend Al Sharpton explain it on TV, and I thought it was a great point. He said, when Black people were experimented on with the syphilis trial, which is, again, is not the only case of injustice, but it's the most well-known and the largest one that we know of, it was because treatment was being withheld from them. Here we are offering life-saving prevention from a condition. It's also important to realize that also enormous numbers of non-minorities have already been vaccinated. But we don't want to err on the side of letting the hesitancy make a more imbalanced, profound lack of equity that already exists. And we don't want to leave large swaths of communities unvaccinated because we don't address these concerns.
Augustine, I think that makes a really great point. I've also heard people say that the treatment for COVID-19 has been really inequitable, and certain populations, Black and Brown individuals particularly, die at much higher rates. And this could actually in some ways serve as a panacea to that, right?
Absolutely.
If people can access it, then that's a line of treatment.
Right, exactly.
I'll pause for any other questions and comments, concerns. My chat is open. Thank you for people using it as well. And as I wait to see if anyone wants to ask any questions over the video, I'll also display Dr. Boehringer's information as well. You can email her at Boehringer@hearttoheart.org. Additionally, we also monitor COVID-19 at hearttoheart.org if you can't quite remember how to spell her name. But either way, if you have any other questions, comments, or concerns, please reach out in that way. And I'll pause for a second and then thank everyone for joining us. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.